Rain lashed the weathered docks of Port Harlow as thunder rolled across the darkening sky. Inside the harbormaster's home, a young girl cowered in the shadows, her face marked with fresh bruises. Her father's rage was as predictable as the tide, but tonight would be different. Through the howling storm came the heavy footfalls of a man the Crown had hunted for years, Gint Buccaneer, pirate captain of the feared vessel Redemption. His weathered face had witnessed countless cruelties across the seven seas, but nothing stirred his wrath like the suffering of the innocent. What would a feared pirate do when confronted with the darkest kind of monster, one who hides behind respectability while destroying his own child? Port Harlow rose from the mist like a weathered sentinel, wooden docks and stone buildings clinging to the rocky coastline. Ships of all sizes bobbed in the harbour, their masts a forest of timber and canvas. It was a prosperous trading hub, where fortunes were made and lost with each tide. William Blackwell had served as harbourmaster for nearly 2 decades. A tall man, with iron-grey hair and a neatly trimmed beard, he cut an imposing figure as he strode along the docks, ledger in hand. The harbour ledger was bound in worn leather, its pages filled with meticulous records of every vessel, cargo, and coin that passed through Port Harlow. "The Martina is 3 days overdue," William announced to his assistant, his voice carrying the authority that had earned him the respect of merchants and sailors alike. "When she arrives, bring the captain to me immediately." His public persona, stern but fair, had made him a pillar of the community. The town council sought his counsel, merchants invited him to dinner, and the Royal Navy officers treated him with deference. None suspected the darkness that dwelled behind his controlled exterior. In the harbourmaster's residence, a stone house overlooking the bay, Eleanor Blackwell moved like a ghost. At 16, she had mastered the art of silence, of occupying space without drawing attention. Her father demanded perfection in all things, spotless floors, precisely arranged furnishings, meals served at exactly the appointed hour. Eleanor winced as she reached for a teacup, her ribs still tender from last week's punishment for a spilled inkwell. The bruises on her arms had faded to a sickly yellow, easy enough to hide beneath long sleeves despite the summer heat. She had learned young that showing weakness only invited more pain. "Eleanor!" Her father's voice boomed through the house. "Where is my clean coat?" "Here, father," she answered, hurrying to the entry hall with the freshly pressed garment. She kept her eyes downcast as he examined her work, heart hammering against her bruised ribs. William nodded curtly. "I'll be at council until evening. Have dinner ready at 7 precisely." His eyes narrowed. "And finish copying those shipping manifests. Your handwriting on yesterday's pages was disgraceful." After he left, Eleanor allowed herself a moment to breathe. She moved to the kitchen window, gazing out at the harbour and the endless horizon beyond. Sometimes she imagined herself on one of those ships, sailing away to places where no one knew her name or the weight of her father's hand. From a loose floorboard beneath her bed, Eleanor retrieved a small journal bound in faded blue cloth. Her mother had given it to her before the fever took her 8 years ago. Inside were Eleanor's sketches, the harbour at dawn, seabirds in flight, sailors' faces, and imagined landscapes from tales she'd overheard in the market. Drawing was her secret rebellion, creating beauty in a world of fear. Her father would destroy the journal if he found it, just as he had destroyed her mother's books and mementos after her death, erasing all traces of joy from their home. Later that afternoon, Eleanor carried a basket of mending to a hidden spot behind a stack of crates near the north dock. Here she could work in peace while watching the harbour activity. The sailors paid her little mind. She was just the harbourmaster's quiet daughter, hardly worth noticing. A commotion drew her attention. A ship unlike any other was approaching, sleek and dark-hulled, with blood-red sails. Even from a distance, Eleanor could see it was built for speed rather than cargo. "The Redemption," whispered a dockworker nearby. "Captain Buccaneer's vessel. Devil take me, I never thought to see it in our harbour." Eleanor watched, transfixed, as the notorious pirate ship drew closer. Tales of Captain Gint Buccaneer had reached even her sheltered ears. Stories of naval ships left burning on the horizon, of merchants relieved of their cargo but curiously left unharmed, of corrupt officials found swinging from yardarms. Something stirred within her, a feeling foreign and dangerous. Hope. When she returned home, Eleanor carefully recorded the ship's arrival in her father's ledger, noting the time and adding redemption in her neatest script. Her hand hesitated over the captain's name. Something told her that the arrival of this particular vessel should perhaps remain less official. She left the captain's name blank, her first small act of defiance against her father's meticulous record-keeping. As she closed the harbour ledger, a strange certainty settled over her. Something in Port Harlow was about to change. The Redemption sliced through the waves with predatory grace, its red sails billowing against the grey sky. At the helm stood Captain Gint Buccaneer, his weathered face as unyielding as the ship beneath his feet. Long hair, once golden but now streaked with silver, was tied back with a leather cord. His coat, worn but well-maintained, bore the subtle marks of his former life, gold buttons with naval insignias that he had never bothered to replace, a silent reminder of the path not taken. Port Harlow ahead. "Captain," called his first mate Thorn, a hulking man with skin dark as mahogany and a voice like distant thunder. Thorn had sailed with Gint for 15 years. Ever since that blood-soaked night when both had chosen freedom over loyalty to a corrupt crown. Gint nodded, his eyes scanning the harbour. "Any sign of Navy vessels?" "None, but the storm will bring them seeking shelter same as us. We have a day, perhaps two." The crew moved with practiced efficiency as they prepared to dock. Unlike the undisciplined rabble that manned most pirate ships, Gint ran the Redemption with military precision. Each sailor knew their role. Each understood the code that had kept them alive while other pirate crews dangled from gallows. "Remember," Gint addressed the assembled crew before they dropped anchor, "we're here for supplies and information, not trouble. Any man who breaks the peace answers to me." His hand rested meaningfully on the hilt of his cutlass. The men nodded solemnly. They had seen what happened to those who disobeyed the captain's orders. As they secured the vessel to the dock, whispers spread along the waterfront. Mothers hurried children indoors, shopkeepers eyed their wares nervously, and the harbour-master's assistant scurried away. "No doubt to report their arrival. They fear us," observed Mara, the ship's physician. A small woman with quick hands and quicker wit. She had once served in the royal court before fleeing with secrets that could have toppled kingdoms. Gint's mouth quirked. Fear keeps things simple, yet it was not simplicity that had driven Gint Buccaneer to become the most notorious pirate captain on the eastern seaboard. The Redemption targeted specific ships, vessels owned by corrupt nobles, slave traders, and those who profited from the suffering of others. Their reputation for violence was deserved, but selective. What few knew was that the Redemption also carried a different cargo. Hidden in the captain's quarters was a chest filled not with gold or jewels, but with papers, evidence of corruption, documents that could expose the rotten heart of the empire. Gint had spent years collecting these fragments of truth, waiting for the moment when they could be used as weapons more powerful than any cannon. As Gint stepped onto the dock, he noted the harbour-master's residence perched on the hillside above. A vine stone house, too grand for a simple civil servant. "The harbour-master here?" he asked a dockhand who hadn't fled at their approach. "Blackwell, is it not?" The man nodded nervously. "I, William Blackwell. 15 years now, and a prosperous 15 years it would seem," Gint remarked, his gaze still on the house. "He runs a tight harbour, does Blackwell," the dockhand offered, then hesitated, though best not to cross him. "Man's got connections all the way to the governor's mansion." Gint tossed the man a silver coin. "For your insight." As the crew dispersed to secure supplies, Gint and Thorn made their way to the town's tavern. The patrons fell silent as they entered, eyes tracking their movement to a corner table. "We'll not find warm welcome here," Thorn murmured. "We don't need warmth. Just information," Gint signaled the nervous barkeep. "Your finest rum and whatever news this harbour holds." The tavern gradually returned to life around them, though conversations remained hushed. Sailors were a superstitious lot, but they were also curious. Soon enough, a few braver souls approached with tales to trade for drinks. Through these exchanges, Gint learned of naval patrols, merchant shipments, and the local power structure. William Blackwell's name arose repeatedly, a man of influence and harsh judgment. None spoke ill of him directly, yet there was something in their careful phrasing that caught Gint's attention. "And the harbormaster's family?" Gint asked casually. "A wife, children?" "Just a daughter," replied an old sailor. "Wife died years back. Fever, they say." He leaned closer. "Girl's a quiet one. Keeps to herself." As night fell, bringing with it the promised storm, Gint stood on the deck of the Redemption, watching rain lash the harbour. Lightning illuminated the harbourmaster's house on the hill, a dark silhouette against the flashing sky. Something about this port felt different. The Redemption had sheltered in dozens of harbours, yet Gint sensed that Port Harlow held secrets that would not remain buried much longer. Eleanor watched from her window as the red-sailed ship docked. The Redemption! Even the name sent a shiver down her spine, not of fear, but of something else, something forbidden. She had heard whispers of Captain Buccaneer since childhood. Tales told in hushed tones at the market, stories that painted him as both monster and hero. Her father had stormed into the house earlier, face flushed with rage. "Pirates!" he had spat, pacing the floor like a caged beast. "In my harbour!" He had immediately dispatched messengers to the naval outpost 30 miles down the coast, demanding patrol ships. Now, as dusk settled over Port Harlow, Eleanor carefully extracted her hidden journal from beneath the floorboard. The blue cloth cover was fraying at the edges, but the pages inside remained her sanctuary. With practiced hands, she sketched the outline of the Redemption, capturing its sleek hull and distinctive sails. Her drawings had improved over the years. What had begun as childish scribbles had evolved into detailed renderings. If her father ever discovered this talent, he would surely find a way to twist it to his benefit or destroy it entirely. She had learned that beauty had no place in his world unless it could be possessed or profited from. Eleanor added details to her sketch. The figurehead, a woman with arms outstretched as if embracing the horizon. The intricate rigging, the cannon ports. She wondered about the men who sailed such a vessel. Were they as fearsome as rumor claimed? Did they truly answer to no law but their captain's word? A sharp knock at her door made her heart leap. She quickly tucked the journal under her pillow. "Eleanor?" Her father's voice, controlled but edged with irritation. "Come down at once. We have matters to discuss." In the study, William Blackwell stood before the fireplace, hands clasped behind his back. "The naval patrol won't arrive until tomorrow at earliest," he stated, without preamble. "Until then, I want you nowhere near the docks. Is that understood?" "Yes, father," she replied, eyes lowered. "These men are savages," he continued, "beyond the reach of civilization. The things they would do to a girl your age." He let the implication hang in the air. Another invisible chain to bind her to the house. But later, when her father had gone to meet with the town magistrate, Eleanor found herself drawn to the harbour once more. Wrapping herself in a plain grey cloak, she slipped out through the kitchen door and made her way down the hillside path. The night air carried the scent of salt and tar, overlaid with the smoky sweetness of pipe tobacco from sailors gathered around braziers. Eleanor kept to the shadows, hood pulled low. This was foolishness, she knew. If her father discovered her disobedience, the punishment would be severe. Yet something stronger than fear pulled her forward. Perhaps it was simple curiosity, or perhaps a deeper hunger to glimpse lives unfettered by the constraints that defined her own. From behind a stack of barrels, she watched as crewmen from the Redemption loaded supplies. They worked efficiently, their movements revealing training that seemed at odds with their reputation. One man caught her attention, tall and imposing, with an air of authority that reminded her of her father, yet fundamentally different. Where William Blackwell's power felt cold and unyielding, this man's presence seemed to burn with inner fire. Captain Buccaneer. It could be no other. Eleanor leaned forward slightly, straining to hear his deep voice as he spoke with a dark-skinned man beside him. A momentary shift in the wind carried his words to her. Harbormaster's records. "We need to know which ships carry the governor's seal." The other man nodded. "And if we're caught?" "We won't be," the captain replied with quiet confidence, her breath caught. They were planning something involving her father's precious ledgers. The forbidden thrill of this knowledge surged through her, followed quickly by fear. If they were caught in the harbormaster's residence, they would hang, and her father's rage would be terrible to behold. Yet she remained frozen, watching as the captain turned to gaze up at the house on the hill, her prison, her home. For a breathtaking moment, it seemed his eyes found her hiding place, though that was surely impossible in the darkness. A hand clamped down on her shoulder. Eleanor gasped, spinning to find one of the town watchmen glowering at her. "Mistress Blackwell," he said, with a mixture of disapproval and concern, "your father would have my position if he knew you were down here. Let me escort you home." As she was led away, Eleanor cast one last glance toward the Redemption and its captain. Something had shifted in the air of Port Harlow tonight, a current of change as tangible as the tide. The storm that had threatened all day finally unleashed its fury as midnight approached. Rain lashed the cobblestone streets of Port Harlow, driving even the most determined revelers from the taverns. Gint pulled his coat tighter around himself as he made his way through the deserted harbour. A small package tucked securely inside his jacket, charts and shipping schedules procured through coin and careful questioning. The harbourmaster's house loomed on the hillside above, most windows dark except for one faint light on the ground floor. Gint had intended to skirt the property entirely on his return to the Redemption, but a strange sound caught his ear, a high-pained cry quickly stifled. Nearly lost beneath the storm's wrath, he paused, rainwater streaming from the brim of his hat. There it was again, unmistakably human, unmistakably distressed. Against better judgment, Gint found himself moving closer to the house, keeping to the shadows of the garden wall. The rain muffled his footsteps as he approached a partially shuttered window from which warm light spilled. Inside, he could make out a well-appointed study, leather-bound books, polished wood, the trappings of respectability, and there, standing rigidly before a desk, was a young woman, the harbourmaster's daughter. Her face was partially turned away, but Gint could see the tension in her slender frame, the way her hands trembled at her sides. "Utterly worthless," came a cold voice. The harbourmaster himself appeared in view, holding something small and delicate. "Your mother's frivolous trinket, and you can't even maintain it properly." In his hands was a small wooden music box, its lid hanging loose from a broken hinge. "I'm sorry." "Father," the girl whispered, her voice nearly inaudible. "I tried to fix it." The slap was sudden, precise, a practiced movement. The girl's head snapped to the side, but she made no sound beyond a sharp intake of breath. "Did I give you permission to touch it?" William Blackwell demanded, his composed facade cracking to reveal something darker beneath. "Did I?" "No, father." This was valuable. He turned the music box in his hands. "Now it's ruined, like everything you touch." Gint's hand had moved unconsciously to his cutlass. In his years at sea, he had witnessed countless acts of cruelty. The strong preying upon the weak, power wielded without mercy or restraint. It was this very pattern that had driven him from naval service, that had set him on his current path. The girl, Eleanor, he recalled from his inquiries, kept her eyes downcast as her father continued his methodical dismantling of her spirit. "Your penmanship in today's logs was disgraceful," Blackwell continued, setting the broken music box aside. "The harbourmaster of Port Royal himself will review these records. Do you wish to embarrass me? To suggest I cannot even train my own daughter to perform simple tasks?" "No, father," she repeated, a response worn smooth like a prayer. "You'll recopy every page before morning," he declared, gesturing to a stack of ledgers. "Perhaps that will improve your attention to detail." As Eleanor reached for the ledgers, her sleeve rode up slightly, revealing a pattern of bruises on her wrist, old and new, yellowing and dark. A grim calendar of ongoing abuse. Something cold and familiar stirred in Gint's chest, a feeling he had not allowed himself in years. He had built walls around certain memories, certain wounds that had never properly healed. Now those barriers threatened to crumble as he watched history repeating itself before his eyes. Blackwell picked up the music box again, studying it with apparent disgust. "Your mother always filled your head with nonsense. Music and art and dreams, useless things that make you weak." With deliberate cruelty, he tossed the delicate object into the fireplace. "Dreams turn to ash, girl. Remember that." The small wooden box caught fire immediately, the mechanism inside giving one discordant note before being consumed by flames. Eleanor made no protest, but Gint saw her shoulders tense, saw the almost imperceptible straightening of her spine. Small defiance in the face of calculated cruelty. As Blackwell turned away to pour himself a drink, Gint caught a glimpse of Eleanor's face fully for the first time. Despite the fresh mark on her cheek, despite the unshed tears glistening in her eyes, there was something in her expression that resonated with him. A banked fire, carefully hidden but not extinguished. Gint withdrew silently into the storm, memories rising unbidden from the depths he had long submerged them. A different time, a different house, a different man with cold eyes and calculated violence. A silver compass passing from trembling hands to small ones. A whispered promise, "North always points to freedom." Thunder rolled across the harbor as Captain Buccaneer made his decision. Some lines could not be crossed, even by those who lived beyond the law. Some injustices demanded answer, whatever the cost. Dawn broke over Port Harlow, painting the harbor in washed-out greys and pale golds. Aboard the Redemption, Gint stood at the bow, turning a silver compass over in his weathered hands. Unlike the utilitarian instruments used for navigation, this was a finely crafted piece, silver filigree surrounding a perfect rose of directions. The Royal Navy insignia on its case partially obscured by years of handling. "You've that look again," Thorne observed, joining him at the railing. "The one that precedes trouble." Gint's mouth quirked slightly. "When have I ever brought trouble to this crew? Shall I count the ways?" Thorne leaned against the rail. "Martinique, Aero 5, Nassau 08. That business with the governor's flagship last winter. All necessary actions. Necessary, yes. Trouble also, yes." Thorne studied his captain's face. "What did you see last night?" Gint was silent for a long moment, his thumb tracing the compass's edge. "The harbormaster, Blackwell, he's not just corrupt, he's cruel. His daughter bears the marks of it." Understanding darkened Thorne's expression. "Not our concern, Captain. We came for supplies and information, not local family disputes. Is that what we call it now? A family dispute?" Gint's voice carried an edge sharper than his blade. "I watched him strike her. Saw the pattern of old bruises. This isn't some momentary loss of temper, it's calculated, routine." Thunder rumbled in the distance, echoing Gint's mood. He flipped open the compass, revealing an inscription inside the lid. "To find true north, one must first know oneself." The words, nearly worn away by time, had been etched by his mother's hand before her death, before his father's grief had calcified into something monstrous. "You know my history," Gint said quietly. Thorne nodded. Of all the crew, only he knew the full truth of his captain's past, how the renowned pirate had once been Gideon Tanner, son of Admiral James Tanner, a naval hero whose private tyranny contrasted sharply with his public glory. "That girl," Gint continued, "has the same look I once wore, hiding in plain sight, keeping her head down, surviving. But there's something else there too, a spark not yet extinguished. And that's what concerns me," Thorne replied. "Your judgment clouds when old wounds bleed anew." Gint closed the compass with a decisive snap. "Have Mara and Fletcher gather information about Blackwell, discreetly. I want to know his routines, his vulnerabilities, his standing with the townspeople." "And the naval patrol ships?" "Still a day out if the harbormaster's messages were accurate." Thorne sighed heavily. "The crew won't understand risking everything for one girl. They don't need to understand. They need to follow orders. As your first mate and friend, I'm telling you this is unwise." Gint turned to face him fully. "And as your captain, I'm telling you it's necessary. The two men locked eyes, years of shared hardship and loyalty, creating a space where truth could exist without rancor. Finally, Thorne nodded once, accepting if not agreeing. As the morning progressed, reports filtered back to the redemption. William Blackwell was indeed a man of influence, cousin to a minor lord, friend to the regional governor, respected by merchants and officials alike. His record-keeping was meticulous, his management of the harbor exemplary. If he skimmed a percentage off the top of port fees, well, that was considered the privilege of position. No one speaks of the daughter directly, Mara reported, returning from the market where her skills as a physician had opened doors to gossip. But there are whispers. The fishwives say she never complains, never speaks out of turn. They find it admirable. Her tone made clear her contrary opinion. Fletcher, a former pickpocket with an uncanny ability to blend into any crowd, brought similar news. Town thinks the harbormaster walks on water. Girl's kept isolated, works as his secretary, rarely leaves the house except for market days or church. And the mother? Gint asked. Died of fever 8 years back, Fletcher replied. Though one old drunk at the tavern hinted there was more to the story. Nothing specific, mind you, just implications. Throughout the day, Gint found his thoughts returning to the scene he had witnessed. The broken music box, the casual cruelty, the girl's contained anguish. It echoed too closely the shadows of his own childhood, the scars, visible and invisible, that had shaped him that evening. As the crew prepared for potential swift departure should naval ships appear, Gint made his decision. He placed the silver compass in his pocket, his talisman, his reminder of both pain and purpose. Have the longboat ready at midnight, he told Thorne. I'm paying the harbormaster a visit, alone. Some conversations are best kept private. Thorne recognized the steel in Gint's voice, the same resolve that had carried them through storms both natural and man-made. And if you don't return? Gint's smile was wolf-like. Then assume I've finally found true north. Morning fog shrouded Port Harlow as the harbour bell rang 6 measured peals, signaling the start of the business day. The sound carried across the water, a daily rhythm that gave structure to the town's existence. Yet for all its regularity and resonance, the bell failed in its most crucial purpose, to warn of danger within the community's very heart. Gint had spent the night weighing options, balancing justice against practicality. Direct confrontation with Blackwell would likely end in bloodshed, bringing naval forces down upon the redemption. Kidnapping the girl outright would brand her a victim of pirates rather than her father's cruelty. There had to be a more calculated approach. The magistrate first, he decided, surprising Thorne with his conventional choice. We test the waters of local justice before muddying them. Port Harlow's magistrate, Justice Edmund Holloway, received visitors in a modest building near the town square. A thin man with spectacles and ink-stained fingers, he projected an air of bureaucratic diligence. Captain Smith, Gint introduced himself using one of many aliases. Recently arrived on trading business. The magistrate's eyes narrowed slightly at the obvious falsehood, but nodded nonetheless. How may I assist you, Captain? I've witnessed something concerning, Gint began carefully, regarding a prominent citizen and his treatment of his daughter. Justice Holloway's expression shifted imperceptibly. Many fathers discipline their children, Captain. The law recognizes parental authority. Discipline is one thing, brutality another. A serious accusation, the magistrate replied, removing his spectacles to polish them deliberately. Against whom? William Blackwell. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. The magistrate replaced his spectacles with careful precision. Our harbormaster is one of Port Harlow's most respected citizens. Respect doesn't preclude cruelty. Do you have evidence of this alleged mistreatment? My own eyes, Gint replied. And I suspect the girl's body bears ample proof, should anyone bother to look. Justice Holloway sat back in his chair. Captain, I would caution you against spreading such claims. Defamation is a serious offense, more serious than a father beating his child. Family matters are private, Captain. The magistrate's tone hardened. Particularly among our better families. Mr. Blackwell has suffered greatly since his wife's passing, raising a difficult daughter alone. Difficult? Gint interrupted, headstrong. Prone to flights of fancy. Holloway shifted uncomfortably. The harbormaster has mentioned seeking medical counsel regarding her nervous disposition. Gint recognized the implication. Any testimony from Eleanor would be dismissed as the ravings of an unstable mind. A common tactic to discredit women who might otherwise speak truth to power. I see, Gint said, rising. Justice in Port Harlow has a particular flavor. Justice everywhere has limitations, Captain. Good day to you. Outside, Thorne waited, reading the outcome in Gint's expression. As expected. Worse. They've already laid groundwork to discredit her if she ever speaks out. Back at the harbour, activity swirled around them, merchants haggling, sailors loading cargo, fishwives gutting the morning catch. Normal mundane life continuing while darkness festered behind respectable walls. The harbour bell rang again, marking the hour with its hollow assurance of safety. Eleanor appeared on the docks, carrying a leather folio of documents. Despite the warm day, she wore long sleeves and a high collar. Her movements were measured, efficient, but Gint noted how she flinched when a sailor dropped a crate nearby. As she approached the harbourmaster's office, Gint saw fresh bruising at her temple, partially concealed by carefully arranged hair. His jaw tightened. Blackwell's grip on this town is absolute, he muttered to Thorne. Even the magistrate won't cross him. Then we're done here, Thorne replied. The tide turns at dusk. I'm not leaving her to this. Captain, would you have left me? Gint asked quietly. The question hung between them, weighted with shared history. Years ago, a young naval lieutenant named Thorne had discovered his commanding officer's son brutalized and locked in a ship's hold, punishment for some minor infraction. That lieutenant had made a choice that day, justice over duty, and neither man had worn a naval uniform since. No, Thorne finally answered. But this is different. How? Thorne had no response. Throughout the day, Gint observed Eleanor's routine, delivering documents, transcribing records, always under the watchful eye of her father or his associates. The harbour bell marked each hour, its ring a mockery of security for a girl imprisoned in plain sight. That evening, Gint made one last attempt at working within the system. He approached the town's priest, Father Michaels, a portly man with kind eyes but weak resolve. I've seen troubling signs, Gint began. Careful not to reveal his identity, the priest's reaction mirrored the magistrate's: discomfort, deflection, and ultimately denial. Harbourmaster Blackwell is a generous patron of our church, Father Michaels explained, fidgeting with his rosary. A pillar of the community. If the girl seems reserved, it's merely her nature, and if her nature includes unexplained injuries. Young ladies often suffer mishaps. Stairs, needlework accidents. The priest avoided Gint's gaze. I'm sure there are innocent explanations. Gint left the church with cold certainty. Port Harlow's institutions would provide no justice for Eleanor Blackwell. The harbour bell rang once more, signalling the day's end, its sound hollow and meaningless. More direct measures then, he decided, returning to the redemption. Tonight, the moon cast silver paths across the harbour waters as Eleanor slipped from her father's house. William Blackwell had departed for an evening council meeting, leaving strict instructions for her to complete the day's backlog of shipping manifests. Instead, after an hour of certainty that he would not return unexpectedly, she had stolen away to her secret refuge, a forgotten boathouse at the far end of the North Pier. The small structure had once belonged to a fisherman who died at sea years ago. Abandoned and thought haunted by superstitious locals, it had become Eleanor's sanctuary. Here she kept small treasures salvaged from her mother's possessions before her father could destroy them. A tarnished hairbrush, a book of poetry, a sketch of wildflowers. Tonight, she simply needed to breathe air untainted by fear. Her ribs ached from yesterday's punishment, delivered after her father discovered she had spoken directly to a merchant captain instead of deferring to the assistant harbourmaster. She leaned against the weathered doorframe, watching moonlight dance on the water when a shadow detached itself from the darkness nearby. Eleanor froze, heart hammering against her bruised ribs. "You shouldn't be out alone at night," said a deep voice, familiar yet strange. The pirate captain stepped into the moonlight, his face half illuminated, half shadowed. Up close, she could see the lines around his eyes, the silver threading through his beard, the scar that bisected his left eyebrow. Eleanor's first instinct was to run, but something in his posture, the careful distance he maintained, hands visible and non-threatening, made her pause. "Are you going to kill me?" she asked, voice steadier than she felt. Something flickered across his face, surprise, perhaps even respect. "No." "Kidnap me then? Hold me for ransom?" "Also no." He remained where he stood, making no move toward her. "Though your father might find that preferable to my actual purpose, which is to offer help." Eleanor laughed, a brittle sound without humor. "I don't need help from a pirate. Those bruises suggest otherwise." Her hand flew instinctively to her collar, where a particularly vivid mark had begun to show above the fabric. Shame and anger flashed through her in equal measure. "You've been watching me. I saw your father strike you. Saw the broken music box." The memory of her mother's treasured possession turning to ash made her throat tighten. "That's none of your concern." "Perhaps not," he agreed. "Yet here I stand." A long silence stretched between them, filled with the gentle lapping of water against the pier and distant sounds of revelry from the taverns. "What is your name?" he finally asked. "Eleanor Blackwell. I'm Gint. I know who you are," she replied. "Captain Gint Buccaneer, terror of the shipping lanes. Wanted in 7 colonies. Despite herself, a hint of curiosity colored her tone. He inclined his head slightly. "My reputation precedes me, though not always accurately." "And which parts are inaccurate?" "The piracy, the pillaging, the indiscriminate cruelty," he answered simply. "I choose my targets carefully." "Much like your father does." The comparison made her flinch. "I should go." "Eleanor." Her name in his mouth was gentle but firm. "I have someone who can help with those injuries." She hesitated, one hand on the doorframe. "Why would you care?" "Because I once stood where you stand. Because some chains are invisible until someone else points them out." Something in his words, or perhaps the way he said them, resonated with a deep, unspoken part of her. Still, a lifetime of caution held her back. "I can't trust you." "Wise," he acknowledged. "Trust no one until they've earned it. But consider this. What's the worst I could do to you that hasn't already been done under your own roof?" The question hung in the air between them, stark and undeniable. From his coat, Gint produced a small cloth pouch. "From my ship's doctor." "Healing herbs for the bruising?" "A salve for pain." He set it on a barrel between them, stepping back immediately. "There's no poison, no tricks. My physician, Mara, is a woman. She would gladly tend to you directly." Eleanor stared at the pouch, conflict evident in her expression. Finally, she reached for it, tucking it quickly into her pocket. "If my father knew I was speaking with you—" "He won't, not from me." An uncomfortable silence fell. Eleanor shifted her weight, wincing slightly at the movement. "Your ribs?" Gint asked. She nodded reluctantly. "The salve will help, but you need proper binding." He gestured toward the Redemption, visible at its mooring. "Mara has supplies." "I can't go there." "No," he agreed, "but she could come to you. Tomorrow, perhaps. This same place." Eleanor studied him, trying to discern his true motives. Men had always wanted something from her. Her father's approval, connection to his influence, or worse. "What do you gain from this?" The question seemed to surprise him. "Not all actions require personal gain." "In my experience, they do." Gint's expression softened slightly. "Then your experience, while painful, has been limited." He took a step back, increasing the distance between them. "Tomorrow after sunset, if you come, Mara will be waiting. If not, we'll trouble you no further." As he turned to leave, Eleanor found herself speaking. "The herbs, what are they?" "Arnica for the bruising, willow bark for the pain. The green leaves are comfrey, it speeds healing. Simple remedies, yet no one had offered them before. In Port Harlow, people saw her injuries and looked away, unwilling to challenge her father's authority or involve themselves in private matters. "Thank you," she said quietly. Gint paused, glancing back at her. "Everyone deserves kindness, Eleanor. Even those who've forgotten how to recognize it. Then he was gone, melding back into the shadows as if he'd never been there at all. Only the small pouch in her pocket proved their encounter had been real. The Salty Wench Tavern buzzed with evening activity, sailors drinking away their shore leave, merchants celebrating successful trades, locals seeking warmth and company. Smoke hung thick beneath the low beams, mingling with the scents of ale, sweat and wood fire. William Blackwell occupied his usual corner table, a position of honour befitting his status. Several prominent townsmen sat with him, their conversation punctuated by deferential laughter whenever the harbourmaster spoke. A polished wooden cane leaned against his chair, not a walking aid, but a symbol of authority, occasionally used to emphasize points in conversation. The tavern's atmosphere shifted when Captain Buccaneer entered. Conversations hushed briefly before resuming with nervous energy. Gint moved deliberately through the crowd, Thorn a step behind him. Neither man was visibly armed, having left their more obvious weapons aboard ship. Though both carried concealed daggers, a reasonable precaution in any port tavern. "The pirate graces us with his presence," Blackwell remarked loudly enough to be heard across the room, earning chuckles from his companions. "I trust you're enjoying our humble harbour while awaiting the Navy's arrival." Gint approached the table directly. "Harbourmaster Blackwell, I believe we've not been formally introduced, nor do we need to be." Blackwell's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Your reputation precedes you, Captain Buccaneer, as does your inevitable appointment with the gallows. Reputations can be misleading," Gint replied evenly. "For instance, yours suggests a man of honour and integrity." The tavern grew quieter, patrons sensing the underlying current of danger. "You've paid your docking fees," Blackwell said, fingers wrapping around his cane. "Your business with me is concluded." "On the contrary," Gint countered. "I have concerns about how Port Harlow is managed." One of Blackwell's companions, a red-faced merchant, puffed up indignantly. "The harbourmaster's management is beyond reproach." "Is it?" Gint's gaze never left Blackwell. "Tell me, does exemplary management extend to beating one's own daughter?" The tavern fell silent. Blackwell's expression hardened to granite. "You overstep, pirate," he said, voice dangerously soft. "Family matters are private." "Abuse isn't private, it's criminal." Gint gestured to the cane. "That's a fine implement of discipline you carry. Leaves distinctive marks, doesn't it?" Blackwell stood slowly. "How dare you—" "I dare because I've seen the evidence," Gint cut him off. "The bruises on your daughter's arms, the way she flinches at sudden movements, the careful way she holds herself when her ribs are tender." Whispers rippled through the tavern. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across some faces. "Eleanor is clumsy," interjected the town physician, a portly man at Blackwell's table. "Always has been. Falls downstairs, bumps into things. I've treated her myself." "How convenient," Thorn murmured from behind Gint, the harbourmaster's face flushed with anger. "You come into my town, spreading vicious lies." "Not lies," Gint replied. From his coat, he withdrew a folded piece of parchment. A record of injuries observed over 3 days. Locations, patterns, stages of healing. Documented by my ship's physician, who, unlike your town doctor, has no reason to cover for you. He placed the document on the table. Several patrons craned their necks, trying to glimpse its contents. "This is absurd," Blackwell sputtered. "The word of a pirate against a respected official." "Not just my word." Gint turned to the tavern at large. "How many of you have seen the marks on Eleanor Blackwell? The careful way she covers her arms, even in summer heat. How many have heard her cries from that fine house on the hill and chosen to look away?" Uncomfortable glances were exchanged throughout the room. No one spoke, but their silence was damning in itself. Blackwell's hand moved to his cane, knuckles white with tension. "You think these people will take the word of a criminal over mine? I've served this town for 15 years. Where were you? When the fever took half our population, when the drought threatened our trade, I was here rebuilding, ensuring prosperity." "A prosperity built on fear," Gint countered. "Tell me, did your wife fall downstairs too?" The question hung in the air like gunpowder smoke. Something dangerous flashed in Blackwell's eyes. "My wife died of fever," he said coldly. "As all of Port Harlow knows. Did she, or did she finally try to stop you from hurting your daughter?" Blackwell's control snapped. With surprising speed, he swung his cane at Gint's head. The captain deflected the blow with his forearm, making no move to counterattack. "Striking me as easily as you strike her," Gint observed. "But I'm not a helpless girl, am I?" The harbormaster's companions rose, tension crackling in the air. Thorne shifted his stance, ready for trouble. "Get out!" Blackwell hissed. "Before I have you arrested." "On what charge?" "Speaking truth." Gint addressed the room again. "Your harbormaster beats his child. He's done it for years while you all pretended not to notice. Ask yourselves why. Is his power worth her suffering? Is your comfort worth her pain?" A serving girl at the back spoke up hesitantly. "I've seen the bruises when she comes to market. Always has an explanation ready." "Silence, girl," Blackwell barked, "or you'll find yourself without employment." "See how quickly threats come to his lips," Gint noted. "Imagine what happens behind closed doors." The tavern keeper, a weathered woman named Agnes, stepped forward. "William, is this true? Eleanor is such a gentle soul." Blackwell's face contorted with rage. "This is outrageous. I won't be questioned by common rabble stirred up by a criminal." He snatched up his cane and stormed toward the door, his associates hurrying after him. At the threshold he turned back. "This isn't over, Buccaneer. By tomorrow you'll regret ever setting foot in Port Harlow." Morning dawned with unusual activity in Port Harlow. Town criers rang bells at every corner, summoning citizens to an emergency gathering. By mid-morning, the town square was filled with murmuring crowds, speculation rippling through the assembled townsfolk. From his vantage point near the chandlery, Thorne watched the proceedings with growing concern. "This doesn't bode well," he muttered to Fletcher, who stood beside him in nondescript clothing that allowed him to blend with the locals. "Captain knew there would be backlash," Fletcher replied, though his expression mirrored Thorne's worry. The crowd parted as William Blackwell approached the makeshift platform erected before the town hall. He moved with calculated dignity, the very picture of an aggrieved public servant. Behind him walked several figures of authority, the magistrate, the town physician, 2 naval officers from a passing patrol boat, and Father Michaels, who looked distinctly uncomfortable. "Quite the assembly of power," Fletcher observed. "Quite the display of alliance," Thorne corrected grimly. Blackwell ascended the platform, his expression grave. In his hand, he carried a rolled document bearing an official-looking seal, the Port Harlow Town Charter, a rare public appearance of the document that outlined the town's governance and laws. "Citizens of Port Harlow," Blackwell began, his voice projecting to the farthest corners of the square, "I come before you today with a heavy heart. Our peaceful community has been infiltrated by a dangerous criminal element." Murmurs swept through the crowd. "Captain Gint Buccaneer," Blackwell pronounced the name with contempt, "is not merely a pirate, but a manipulator who seeks to disrupt our way of life. Last night he made vile accusations against me, against my family, in a transparent attempt to destabilize our town's leadership." The harbormaster unfurled the charter, pointing to a particular section. "Our founding document is clear. The safety and moral character of Port Harlow shall be preserved against all corruption and outside influence. As your harbormaster, I have upheld this sacred trust for 15 years. Blackwell paused, mastering his emotion with visible effort. "Now, I must speak of a private matter. My daughter, Eleanor, as many of you know, has suffered from nervous afflictions since her mother's passing. Her condition makes her susceptible to manipulation and fantasy." The town physician stepped forward, lending his authority to Blackwell's words. "I have treated Eleanor since childhood. Her bruises and injuries result from episodes during which she harms herself. We had hoped to shield her from public scrutiny, but circumstances force us to speak openly. From his position, Thorn could see doubt flickering across some faces in the crowd. Not everyone was convinced. The serving girl who had spoken up in the tavern frowned openly, though she remained silent. "Last night," Blackwell continued, "we discovered that Eleanor has gone missing." Gasps rippled through the assembly. The timing so soon after Buccaneer's arrival cannot be coincidence. I believe he has kidnapped my daughter, perhaps to ransom her, or worse. His voice broke convincingly. To force her to substantiate his false claims against me. One of the naval officers stepped forward. "We have dispatched messengers to the nearest naval garrison. A flotilla will arrive within 2 days to apprehend this pirate and rescue the girl." Fletcher nudged Thorn. "We need to warn the captain." Thorn nodded almost imperceptibly, eyes still fixed on the proceedings. Blackwell raised his hand for silence as the crowd's agitation grew. "I am offering a substantial reward for information leading to my daughter's return and Buccaneer's capture. 100 gold sovereigns. The sum, enough to purchase a small farm, sent another wave of murmurs through the crowd. Furthermore," Blackwell added, "I remind all citizens of their duty under our charter. Harboring criminals or withholding information regarding this matter constitutes treason against Port Harlow itself." The magistrate stepped forward, reading from an official-looking document. "By the authority vested in me, I hereby order that all vessels be searched, all warehouses and storage facilities be inspected, and a nightly curfew be enforced until this crisis is resolved." As the assembly began to disperse, now buzzing with purposeful energy, Thorn and Fletcher withdrew carefully toward the harbor. "The girl is missing?" Fletcher whispered. "Not kidnapped, that's certain," Thorn replied. "The captain would never—" "I know that. But where is she?" Back aboard the Redemption, they found Gint studying navigation charts in his cabin. His expression darkened as they relayed Blackwell's public performance. "He's clever," Gint acknowledged, "using Eleanor's absence to turn the tables." "Do you know where she is?" Thorn asked directly. "Safe," Gint replied. "After last night's confrontation, returning home would have been dangerous for her." "You hid her?" "She hid herself. I merely provided options." Gint traced a route on the chart before him. "Mara is with her now." "The town's being turned against us," Fletcher warned. "They're searching every vessel. It's only a matter of time before they reach the Redemption." "Let them search," Gint said calmly. "They won't find her here." Thorn studied his captain's face. "This puts the entire crew at risk. The naval flotilla will arrive in 2 days, yes." Gint rolled up the chart deliberately, "by which time Blackwell's true nature will be exposed for all to see." "How can you be certain?" Gint's expression hardened. "Because Eleanor knows the truth about her mother's death, and she's finally ready to speak it." The first naval vessel appeared on the horizon at dawn, its white sails stark against the pink-gold sky. By mid-morning, 2 more had joined it, anchoring. At the harbor mouth, close enough to block escape, far enough to avoid entanglement with merchant ships. Their presence cast a pall over Port Harlow, the Union Jack snapping in the breeze, like a promise of retribution. On the main dock, William Blackwell stood in conversation with a naval lieutenant who had come ashore via longboat. The harbormaster's clothing was impeccable, his bearing dignified, every inch the concerned father cooperating with authorities. "They're moving faster than expected," Thorn observed from the Redemption's quarterdeck. "Those aren't patrol boats, that's a frigate and 2 sloops of war." Gint studied the vessels through a spyglass. "The Intrepid, the Valor, and the Dauntless. Captain Morris commands the frigate. We've met before. Unfavorably, I assume. He's lost 2 prize vessels to us. He'll be eager for revenge." Across the harbor, naval marines in redcoats began methodically searching ships, working their way toward the Redemption. Blackwell had positioned himself strategically, directing the search while maintaining a watchful eye on Gint's vessel. "We can't outrun them," Thorne stated the obvious. And fighting would be suicide, Gint lowered the spyglass. We're not running and we're not fighting. Then what's your plan? Trust, Gint replied simply. Miles from the harbour, in a fisherman's cottage long abandoned on a rocky promontory, Eleanor Blackwell gazed out at the distant naval ships through the window. The dwelling was simple but clean, restored to habitability by Gint's crew as one of several safe houses they maintained around the colonies. Your fever's breaking, Mara observed, checking Eleanor's forehead with a practiced hand. The willow bark tea is helping. The past day had been a blur for Eleanor. The escape from her father's house after overhearing his plans to commit her to an asylum, the long trek through forest paths to this hidden refuge, the collapse from exhaustion and emotional turmoil upon arrival. Mara had been her constant companion, tending both her physical and emotional wounds with equal care. They're searching for me, Eleanor said, watching the naval activity in the distance. Yes. Mara placed a folded naval warrant on the rough-hewn table between them. This arrived from our lookout in town. Your father has accused Captain Buccaneer of kidnapping you. Eleanor picked up the document, scanning its official language. Her father's influence was evident in every line. The precision of the accusations, the carefully constructed narrative portraying her as mentally unstable and Gint as a calculating predator. He'll hang for this, she whispered, fingers tightening on the parchment. Not if the truth is known. Mara replied. Eleanor turned from the window, facing the physician directly. What truth? That my father beats me. That's not enough. People have suspected that for years and done nothing. Then tell them something they don't know, Mara suggested. Something they can't ignore. The memory surfaced unbidden. Her mother's final night, the argument, the sounds from the bedroom, the terrible silence that followed. Her father emerging alone, his hands clean but his shirt sleeves spotted with what could not possibly have been wine. I was 8, Eleanor said, her voice distant. Young enough that people believed I misunderstood what I saw. Or perhaps they simply chose to believe that, and now I understand perfectly. Eleanor's gaze hardened. My father murdered my mother, and I've been paying for my silence ever since. Back at the harbour, the search had reached vessels on either side of the redemption. Gint observed the methodical marines with outward calm, though Thorne noted the subtle tension in his captain's shoulders. They'll be aboard within the hour, Thorne murmured. The crew is prepared to resist. No resistance, Gint ordered. Let them search. Keep all weapons secured, and when they arrest you for piracy, if not kidnapping. They'll try, Gint acknowledged. But events are already in motion that may surprise Captain Morris as much as our friend the harbormaster. As if on cue, Fletcher appeared, making his way casually along the dock as though merely attending to business. He paused near a pile of crates, appearing to examine their markings while actually signaling to Gint. 3 quick taps on his left shoulder. It's done, Gint said, satisfaction evident in his voice. What's done? Thorne demanded. Eleanor has made her choice. Near the town square, a small crowd had begun to gather. At its center stood a young woman few recognized at first, Eleanor Blackwell, but transformed. Gone was the hunched posture and downcast eyes. She stood straight, her gaze steady, her voice clear as she addressed the growing assembly. Citizens of Port Harlow, she began, her words carrying across the suddenly hushed square. My name is Eleanor Blackwell. I have not been kidnapped. I fled my home to escape my father's cruelty the town has ignored for 8 years. William Blackwell, alerted by a breathless messenger, abandoned the naval lieutenant mid-sentence and hurried toward the square, his face mottled with rage. On the redemption, Gint watched the distant commotion with grim satisfaction. Now we see what Port Harlow values more, truth or power. You knew she would do this? I hoped, Gint corrected. The choice was always hers. The naval warrant fluttered on the deck between them, its official seal gleaming dully in the morning light, a symbol of authority, now challenged by the courage of a girl who had found her voice at last. The town square had fallen silent. A collective breath held as Eleanor faced the gathering crowd. She stood on the same platform her father had used the day before. though she claimed no authority beyond her own truth. The simple dress she wore, borrowed from a sympathetic townswoman, bore no adornment, yet she had never appeared more dignified. For 8 years, she continued, her voice gaining strength with each word, I have lived in terror within my own home. My father, whom you respect and fear in equal measure, has systematically broken both my body and spirit. William Blackwell pushed through the crowd, his face contorted with fury and disbelief. Eleanor, stop this nonsense immediately. Her gaze met his across the sea of faces. I will not stop. Not ever again. From within her pocket, Eleanor withdrew a small gold locket on a delicate chain, her mother's most treasured possession, one she had managed to hide from her father's purge of remembrances. The crowd murmured as sunlight caught the burnished metal. My mother wore this locket every day of her married life, Eleanor explained, holding it aloft for all to see. She told me it contained a love letter from my father, written during their courtship. William had reached the edge of the platform, his hand extended. Give me that trinket, girl. You're unwell, confused. I am perfectly lucid, Eleanor replied, stepping away from his reach. For perhaps the first time since Mother died. With deliberate movements, she opened the locket. Inside was not a love letter, but a tightly folded piece of parchment, yellowed with age. Eleanor unfolded it carefully. This is my mother's handwriting, dated 3 days before her death. Her voice wavered slightly, but remained clear enough to carry. It reads, should harm befall me, know it comes by William's hand. He has threatened my life should I expose his dealings with Governor Halifax. The missing shipment was not lost at sea, but diverted for their private gain. I have discovered ledgers hidden beneath the floorboards. God forgive me for my silence until now. I fear for my daughter's safety should I perish. Gasps rippled through the crowd. William's face drained of color. Lies, he hissed. Your mother was delirious with fever when she died, was she? Eleanor challenged. Or did you ensure her silence the only way you could? The physician pronounced her dead of fever, but he never examined the tea you gave her that final night. The town physician shifted uncomfortably at the edge of the crowd. William lunged forward suddenly, grasping Eleanor's wrist. Enough! Release her! The command cut through the tension like a blade. Captain Buccaneer stood at the square's edge, Thorne and several crewmen flanking him. They carried no visible weapons, yet their presence radiated controlled danger. This doesn't concern you, pirate. William snarled, his grip tightening on Eleanor's arm. I've made it my concern. Gint moved forward, the crowd parting before him. Remove your hand from her or lose it. The threat hung in the air, its sincerity unmistakable. After a moment of seething tension, William released Eleanor's wrist. Your timing is impeccable, Buccaneer, he sneered. Naval officers are already searching your ship. Soon they'll have you in chains. Let them search, Gint replied evenly. They'll find no kidnapped girl, no contraband. Eleanor moved away from her father, the locket clutched protectively in her hand. Captain Buccaneer offered me sanctuary when all of Port Harlow turned a blind eye to my suffering. He is not my abductor, but my savior. William's gaze darted between them, calculation replacing rage. You expect them to believe a pirate over the harbormaster, a confused girl over her guardian. I expect the evidence to speak for itself, Eleanor answered. She addressed the crowd directly. For years you've whispered about my injuries, made excuses, looked away. No more. Today I stand before you with the truth. My father killed my mother to protect his corruption, then imprisoned me in grief and pain to ensure my silence. From the harbor came sudden commotion, shouts, and the distinctive sound of Marines' boots on cobblestones. Captain Morris himself approached the square, flanked by armed sailors. His gaze fixed on Gint with predatory satisfaction. Captain Gint Buccaneer, he announced formally. You are under arrest for piracy, kidnapping, and interference with Crown business. Kidnapping? Gint raised an eyebrow. Your alleged victim stands there, freely declaring her story. Morris hesitated, glancing at Eleanor with confusion. Captain Morris, William stepped forward smoothly. My daughter is unwell. She's been manipulated by this criminal. The locket she holds was stolen from my home. It contains private family correspondence. Eleanor's fingers tightened around the locket. "Then you admit this letter exists?" For the first time, William faltered, realizing his mistake. "I demand to see this correspondence," Morris said, professional curiosity piqued. "As magistrate, I must insist as well," added Justice Holloway, who had been watching the proceedings with increasing discomfort. Eleanor approached the naval captain, offering the unfolded letter. "My mother's final testimony, hidden where she knew it would be safe. In the one possession my father believed contained only sentimental value." As Morris read the letter, his expression hardened. He looked up at William Blackwell with new eyes. "The governor mentioned here, Halifax, was removed from office last year for widespread corruption. This document suggests you were his accomplice." William's composure cracked entirely. "Preposterous. You take the word of a disturbed girl and a pirate over a crown official." "I take evidence where I find it," Morris replied coolly. "And it seems I found it in abundance." Gint moved to stand beside Eleanor. "There's more evidence to be found, Captain. In the harbormaster's residence, beneath the floorboards of the master bedroom, just as the letter indicates." William lunged suddenly, not toward Eleanor but toward Gint. "You've destroyed everything." From his boot, he pulled a hidden dagger, its blade flashing in the sunlight as he struck. Gint deflected the blow with practiced ease, but made no move to counterattack. He didn't need to. Eleanor had already acted, bringing the heavy locket down on her father's wrist with surprising force. The dagger clattered to the cobblestones. "Attempted murder before witnesses," Morris observed dryly. "How convenient." As Marines restrained the struggling harbormaster, Eleanor stood tall, the locket hanging open in her hand, a small object that had finally brought truth to light. The harbormaster's residence stood silent on the hillside, its windows dark and accusing in the afternoon light. Inside, the search party moved with methodical precision. Naval officers, the magistrate and two trusted aldermen, their faces grim as they followed Eleanor's directions to the loose floorboards in her father's bedroom. "Here," she indicated, her voice steady despite the memories that haunted this house. "Behind his bed, beneath the Moroccan rug." Captain Morris nodded to his men, who moved the heavy furniture and rolled back the ornate carpet. The floorboards appeared seamless at first glance, but closer examination revealed one plank with slightly different coloring. A Marine worked his knife into the seam, and with a soft creak, the hidden compartment opened. Inside lay a black leather ledger, its binding worn from frequent handling, but its contents pristine. Page after page of meticulous records in William Blackwell's distinctive handwriting. "God's mercy," breathed Justice Holloway as the contents became clear. The ledger detailed years of systematic corruption, shipments diverted, taxes evaded, bribes paid and received. Names of conspirators filled the margins, including merchants, ship captains, and government officials across 3 colonies. "This reaches further than Port Harlow," Morris observed grimly. "Halifax's network was extensive, it seems." Eleanor had remained in the doorway, unwilling to step fully into her father's domain. "My mother must have discovered it shortly before her death, and paid with her life for that discovery," added the magistrate. His earlier skepticism transformed to shocked conviction. Back in the town square, William Blackwell sat under guard, his wrists bound, his authority evaporated. News of the ledger's discovery spread through Port Harlow like wildfire, drawing townspeople back to the square in growing numbers. With each passing hour, more citizens found courage to speak of incidents previously ignored. The harbormaster's ruthless punishment of those who questioned his decisions, the mysterious disappearances of sailors who had crossed him, the selective enforcement of port regulations that favored his allies. "It was never just about Eleanor," observed Agnes, the tavern keeper, to those gathered around her. "We were all under his thumb, weren't we? Too afraid to speak against him, too comfortable to risk our livelihoods." On the Redemption, Gint and Thorne watched the town's transformation from the quarterdeck. "Remarkable how quickly loyalty shifts when fear is removed," Thorne noted. "Fear and self-interest," Gint amended. "They knew, Thorne. Perhaps not everything, but enough. They chose safety and silence. Captain Morris approached the ship, this time without armed marines, but with Eleanor at his side. The naval officer's demeanor toward Gint had shifted, not friendly, but respectful, one sailor to another. "Captain Buccaneer," he called up. "A word, if you please." Gint descended to the dock, his posture relaxed but alert. "Captain Morris," the naval officer held out the black ledger. This complicates matters considerably. Blackwell's records implicate people throughout the colonies, including several naval officers who coordinated the seizure of so-called pirate vessels that were actually carrying legitimate cargo. "How inconvenient for you," Gint remarked dryly. "Indeed." Morris glanced at Eleanor, then back to Gint. "Miss Blackwell has given testimony that places your actions in a different light. You confronted her father not for personal gain, but to protect her from further abuse." "I did what anyone should have done," Gint replied. "The fact that no one else did speaks to Blackwell's power, not my virtue." Morris smiled thinly. "Nevertheless, I find myself in an unusual position. The warrant for your arrest cites crimes now called into question by this evidence." He tapped the ledger. "Several ships you're accused of plundering appear in these pages as part of Blackwell and Halifax smuggling operation, meaning they were already engaged in illegal activity." Thorne interjected from the gangplank. "Precisely." Morris looked uncomfortable with his own conclusion. "It raises the question of whether you were acting as a pirate or as something else, a privateer without letters of marque," Gint suggested, amusement flickering in his eyes. "Or perhaps a citizen enforcing laws others chose to ignore." "I wouldn't go that far," Morris cautioned. "But the Admiralty will need to review these findings before proceeding with your case." Eleanor, who had remained silent during this exchange, finally spoke. "Captain Buccaneer saved my life, Captain Morris. Whatever his past actions, in Port Harlow he has been nothing but honorable." The naval officer studied her for a moment, then nodded. "So noted, Miss Blackwell." He turned back to Gint. "Consider yourself provisionally at liberty, Captain. My ships will remain in harbour while we sort through Blackwell's records and secure the conspirators named therein. I suggest you do not attempt to depart in the meantime." "Wouldn't dream of it," Gint replied with exaggerated courtesy. "Port Harlow has proven far too interesting to leave just yet." As Morris departed, Eleanor approached Gint directly. "Thank you," she said simply, "for believing me when no one else would." "Truth has a certain resonance," Gint replied. "Once heard, it's difficult to ignore. My father has been telling his version of the truth for so long that even I began to doubt my own memories." She touched the locket at her throat. "Without this, I might never have found the courage to speak." "Courage was always there," Gint corrected gently. "You simply needed a reason to find it." From the town came the sound of the harbour bell, not the measured tolls that marked the hours, but a continuous ringing that signified important news. The Black Ledger had opened a floodgate of revelations, washing away years of carefully constructed facades. William Blackwell's empire of fear was crumbling, brick by brick, with each new disclosure. "What happens now?" Eleanor asked, her gaze fixed on the town that had both sheltered and imprisoned her. Gint followed her gaze. "Now Port Harlow faces its own reflection, something few towns ever truly do. It won't be comfortable, and for me, that," Gint said with quiet certainty, "is entirely your choice." Sunrise painted Port Harlow in shades of gold and amber, belying the turmoil that had gripped the town through the night. The magistrate's office, where William Blackwell had been held under guard, stood open to the morning air, its door splintered, two Marines slumped against the wall. Alive but unconscious, 3 men, reported Fletcher, who had been first to discover the scene, arrived in a closed carriage just before dawn. They wore masks, but one had the insignia of Governor Halifax's household guard on his boot. Gint surveyed the empty cell with narrowed eyes. "Oh, loyalties die hard." Captain Morris arrived moments later, his expression thunderous. "2 of my best men, drugged like common fools." "Who would dare?" "Those with the most to lose from Blackwell's testimony," Gint interrupted. "His ledger named names, Captain. Powerful ones." The naval officer's jaw tightened. We'll find him. I've dispatched riders to all nearby ports and roadhouses. You won't find him on any public road, Gint predicted. Men like Blackwell always have escape routes planned. Secret paths, private vessels, safe houses known only to their conspirators. Aboard the Redemption, Eleanor received the news of her father's escape with surprising composure. She sat in Gint's cabin, a large sailing map spread before her on the polished table. Various locations had been marked with small symbols, a star for ports known to be safe, a cross for those hostile to the Redemption, circles of varying sizes indicating potential opportunities. He'll go south, she said with quiet certainty. To Charlestown, perhaps, or further to Spanish territories. He always spoke of Cuba when trade discussions turned sour, how its governors could be bought for the right price. Mara, who had remained Eleanor's constant companion, placed a cup of herbal tea at her elbow. You know his mind well. He had to, Eleanor replied simply. Survival required it. She traced the coastline on the map, her finger moving past familiar harbors toward distant shores. For the first time in her life, Eleanor contemplated a future unbounded by fear and walls. The sensation was exhilarating and terrifying in equal measure. What will you do now? Mara asked, voicing the question that hung in the air. Eleanor's hand paused over the map. I don't know. For so long, my only goal was to endure each day. I never dared plan beyond that. You have options, Mara noted. More than most young women in your position. It was true. The town council, eager to distance themselves from William Blackwell's crimes, had declared that his property and assets, those not proven to be ill-gotten, would pass to Eleanor as his sole heir. The harbormaster's house and a modest fortune would be hers once the investigations concluded. I could stay, Eleanor mused, though her tone suggested the idea held little appeal. Become the respectable spinster of Port Harlow, forever defined by my father's shadow. Or, Mara prompted. Eleanor's gaze lifted to the porthole, through which she could see open water stretching to the horizon. Or I could leave. Start anew where no one knows my name or my history. The door opened, admitting Gint and Thorne. The captain's expression was grim as he related the details of William's escape. The naval search will be thorough, but likely fruitless, he concluded. Your father had too many connections, too many contingencies in place. Eleanor nodded, unsurprised. He always said a man of influence should be prepared for changing winds. Captain Morris wants your assistance, Thorne added. He believes you might know details of your father's connections that could aid their search. I'll tell him what I can, she agreed. Though my father kept his business associations separate from our home life, Gint studied the map before her, noting the markings with approval. Planning your course? A faint smile touched Eleanor's lips. Considering possibilities, the Redemption sails with the evening tide, he informed her. Captain Morris has reluctantly acknowledged that our presence here is no longer necessary, given recent developments. The implication hung unspoken between them. Eleanor met his gaze directly. Are you offering me passage, Captain Buccaneer? I'm offering you choice, he corrected. The Redemption has room for another crew member, should you wish to see more of the world than Port Harlow's shores. Or we can arrange secure transport to any colonial city where you might start afresh. And if I choose to stay... Gint's expression softened slightly. Then we leave you with the means to protect yourself, should your father ever return. Eleanor turned back to the map, her fingers tracing the Redemption's potential routes. Each line represented freedom, from fear, from memory, from the confines of a life she had never chosen. I've lived my entire life in one house, on one hill, overlooking one harbor, she said quietly. I've watched ships come and go, imagining the worlds they visited. And now... Mara prompted gently. Eleanor's finger settled on a point far from Port Harlow. Now I think perhaps it's time I saw those worlds for myself. The decision once made brought a clarity to her features that transformed her. No longer the harbormaster's downtrodden daughter, she stood straighter, her eyes bright with possibility. I'll need proper clothing, she said practically, and to learn a skill useful aboard ship, Gint nodded, approval evident in his expression. Mara could use an assistant in the surgery. Your steady hand and attention to detail would serve well there. Then it's settled. Eleanor folded the map with deliberate care. When the Redemption sails this evening, I sail with her. As she left the cabin to prepare, Thorne gave Gint a questioning look. Are you certain this is wise? She's never known life at sea. Neither had any of us once, Gint replied. She's survived far worse storms than any the Atlantic will throw at her. The sailing map lay folded on the table between them. Its carefully marked routes now transformed from abstract possibilities to Eleanor's chosen future, a chart not just of coastlines and currents, but of a life reclaimed from the wreckage of the past. Grey clouds gathered on the horizon as evening approached, promising a swift change in weather. Along Port Harlow's harbour, warning flags snapped in the strengthening wind, red and white pennants signalling an approaching storm. Old sailors studied the darkening sky with practiced eyes, securing vessels and cargo against the coming tempest. The Redemption's crew worked with efficient haste, preparing for departure before the worst of the weather hit. Eleanor stood on the quarterdeck beside Gint, a small bundle of personal possessions at her feet, all she cared to take from her previous life. The harbormaster's house loomed on the hillside above, windows dark and accusing, like a chapter closing on a life she would never revisit. Last chance to change your mind, Gint observed. Watching her face carefully, Eleanor shook her head. There's nothing for me here but ghosts. A shout from the crow's nest interrupted their conversation. Sail! Southwest approach! Thorne raised his spyglass, focusing on the distant vessel. His expression darkened. Not naval. Merchant configuration, but he hesitated. Something's not right. Gint took the glass, studying the approaching ship. It flew no colors, its sails dark against the stormy sky, heavily crewed for a merchant vessel. Pirates? Eleanor asked. No. Gint's voice was grim. Mercenaries. As the mysterious ship drew closer to the harbor mouth, two smaller vessels emerged from a hidden cove south of town, local fishing boats, but laden with armed men rather than the day's catch. A coordinated approach, Thorne noted. They know what they're doing. Gint turned to Eleanor, his expression grave. Your father's work, I'd wager. Those are hired guns, not random opportunists. The first shot from the approaching ship confirmed his assessment. A warning blast aimed over the town, the boom echoing across the water like thunder. Panic erupted along the waterfront as merchants and townspeople recognized the threat. They'll target the naval vessels first, Gint predicted, then control the harbor. With what purpose? Eleanor asked, though she already suspected the answer. Revenge, Gint replied simply, and retrieval of evidence that could hang your father and his associates. Captain Morris, alerted by the cannon fire, ordered his marines into defensive positions. But his ships, while well armed, were positioned for blockade rather than harbor defense. The mercenaries had chosen their approach well, using the coming storm and fading light to maximum advantage. We should sail now, Thorne urged. While we still can. Gint's gaze moved from the approaching threat to the town beyond. Port Harlow's citizens scrambled for safety, many looking toward the naval vessels for protection. Despite their earlier complicity in William's abuses, these were largely ordinary people, shopkeepers, fishwives, laborers, caught in a powerful man's vengeance. Captain? Thorne pressed. Gint turned to Eleanor. Your father means to punish the town for turning against him. Innocent people will die. They aren't entirely innocent, she replied, remembering years of averted gazes and silent acceptance of her suffering. Then with a sigh she added, but they don't deserve this. The decision formed in Gint's eyes before he spoke it aloud. Prepare for battle stations, not departure. Thorne stared at his captain in disbelief. We're staying to fight? Against mercenaries? For a town that would have happily watched us hang days ago? For justice, Gint corrected. And because running from William Blackwell solves nothing. He'd only hunt us with the same vigor he's hunting his former neighbors. The crew, overhearing this exchange, exchanged glances of concern and resignation. They had followed Gint through countless dangers, trusting his judgment even when it seemed to court disaster. This would be no different. Eleanor watched the transformation as the Redemption prepared for combat. Hatches opened to reveal cannon, weapons distributed, positions assigned. The ship that had offered her escape now stood as Port Harlow's unexpected defender. "I can help," she told Gint. "I know every approach to the harbor, every weakness in the town's defenses." "Good," he nodded. "Work with Fletcher to coordinate with the townspeople. They'll need organization if they're to survive this." As Eleanor hurried to comply, the first fishing boat reached the harbor proper. Men poured onto the docks armed with muskets and cutlasses. Their leader, a tall figure in a dark coat, directed their movements with cold precision. "Barrett," Gint identified him, recognition clear in his voice. "Military background. Dishonorable discharge for excessive brutality, even by naval standards. Now he sells his services to the highest bidder." "You know him?" Thorne asked. "We've crossed paths," Gint replied grimly. "He'll remember me." The storm flags whipped more urgently now as wind gusted across the harbor. Nature's violence would soon compound the humankind, creating chaos that would either aid their defense or render it impossible. Captain Morris approached the Redemption by longboat, his expression a mixture of suspicion and relief. "Captain Buccaneer," he called up, "I'm told you're preparing to assist in the town's defense rather than making your escape." "Correct, Captain," Gint replied. "It seems we have a common enemy today." Morris studied him for a moment, professional assessment overriding personal animosity. "My vessels are positioned poorly for harbor defense. Your ship has greater maneuverability in these shallow waters." "Are you proposing an alliance, Captain?" "A temporary arrangement of necessity," Morris clarified. "My Marines will defend the town proper. Your vessel can prevent additional forces from entering the harbor." Gint smiled thinly. "Agreed. Though I suspect William Blackwell finds our cooperation particularly galling." As Morris departed to position his men, the first screams rose from the waterfront. Barrett's mercenaries had begun their assault, targeting any who resisted with brutal efficiency. The storm flags, torn by increasing winds, fluttered violently against the darkening sky, harbingers of the violence about to engulf Port Harlow from both man and nature. Rain lashed Port Harlow as the battle for the harbor reached its crescendo. Barrett's mercenaries had secured the southern docks, but found themselves pinned between the naval marines to the north and the unexpected resistance of townspeople defending their homes. The Redemption had engaged the hired warship at the harbor mouth. Cannon fire exchanged through sheets of driving rain. Eleanor moved through the chaos with newfound purpose, guiding evacuees to the safety of the stone church on higher ground. Her knowledge of the town's layout, its hidden alleys and secret passages, proved invaluable as she helped organize the defense, transforming from victim to protector in the span of a single storm-racked night. "The warehouse district is lost," reported Fletcher, appearing at her side with water streaming from his hat. "Barrett's men have set fires despite the rain." Eleanor surveyed the harbor from their vantage point near the town hall. Orange flames punctuated the gloom, defying the downpour through sheer malevolent will. "They're not just looting," she realized. "They're destroying evidence. Anything connected to my father's networks." "Covering his tracks," Fletcher agreed grimly. A familiar figure emerged from the shadows behind them. Captain Morris, his uniform sodden but his bearing undiminished. "Miss Blackwell, we've captured several mercenaries who confirm your suspicions. This attack was ordered by your father to eliminate evidence and witnesses. Where is he?" Eleanor asked, scanning the chaotic scene below. "Not among the landing parties, according to our prisoners. He's directing operations from the ship at anchor." Eleanor's gaze shifted to the dark vessel beyond the harbor mouth, where the Redemption engaged in a deadly dance of cannon and sail. "Then he's a coward to the end." A tremendous explosion rocked the waterfront as a powder magazine ignited. The blast illuminated the harbor in a brief, hellish glow, revealing a smaller boat rowing purposefully toward the North Pier, away from the main fighting. "There," Morris pointed. "That craft is heading for the harbormaster's house. Your father wouldn't trust underlings with whatever he most desperately seeks to recover." Eleanor's blood chilled, despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. The hidden room behind the library. There's a second set of records there, names, dates, locations. He showed me once when he was deep in his cups, proud of his methodical documentation. We must reach it first, Morris declared. Fletcher, gather what men you can spare. No, Eleanor countered. The house has hidden approaches only my father and I know. A large group would never make it through undetected. You can't go alone, Fletcher protested. She won't be alone. They turned to find Gint standing behind them, soaked to the skin, but emanating calm determination. His cutlass hung at his side, water dripping from its sheath. The redemption, Morris inquired. In Thorne's capable hands, Gint replied. The mercenary vessel is taking on water. It won't threaten the harbour much longer. Eleanor met his gaze. My father will be there. I'm counting on it, Gint answered, his voice quiet but edged with steel. They made their way through rain-slicked streets, avoiding pockets of fighting. Eleanor led them along a path that wound behind houses and through overgrown gardens, until they reached the rear of the harbormaster's property. The grand house stood silhouetted against the stormy sky, a single light visible in the library window. He's already inside, Eleanor whispered. Gint drew his cutlass. Is there another entrance? She nodded, leading them to what appeared to be a garden shed. Inside, beneath a false floor, a narrow tunnel stretched toward the house, a smuggler's path from Port Harlow's earlier. Less respectable days. The passage emerged behind a pivoting bookcase in the library's far corner. Eleanor pressed her ear to the hidden door, listening intently before signaling Gint forward. Together, they eased the panel open just enough to observe the room beyond. William Blackwell stood at his desk, frantically sorting through documents by lantern light. Two armed men flanked the main door, while a third examined the bookshelves, searching for the trigger mechanism to the secret compartment where the most damning evidence was hidden. He doesn't know about this entrance, Eleanor breathed. Mother showed it to me years ago as a place to hide when his rages came. Gint's expression hardened. With a silent nod to Eleanor, he tensed to spring from their hiding place. Before he could move, the third mercenary gave a triumphant grunt. Found it, sir. William turned, relief evident on his face. Excellent. Gather everything inside. Leave nothing. As the man reached for the compartment, Eleanor made her decision. She pushed past Gint, stepping into the library with quiet determination. Hello, Father. William froze, disbelief etching new lines into his face. Eleanor? The mercenaries swung their weapons toward her, but William raised a hand, stopping them. My dear daughter, I thought you'd fled with your pirate savior. I came back, she replied simply. For justice. William's expression softened into something almost convincing, the reasonable father, the concerned guardian. There's been a terrible misunderstanding, child. These men forcing my confession, threatening you. Stop! Eleanor's voice cut through his manipulation like a blade. No more lies. From her pocket she withdrew a small flintlock pistol, a gift from Mara before they separated. Its weight was unfamiliar in her hand, but her grip remained steady. William's gaze fixed on the weapon. You wouldn't harm your own father. You're right, she agreed, her voice steady. I've never had the stomach for cruelty. Unlike you. Gint emerged from the hidden passage, cutlass gleaming dully in the lantern light. The mercenaries raised their weapons, creating a deadly tableau frozen in momentary stalemate. It's over, Blackwell, Gint stated. Your mercenaries are being driven back. The town stands against you. William's facade of paternal concern evaporated. Nothing is over until I declare it so. This town, this harbour exists by my will. Your delusion is remarkable, Gint observed, William's face contorted with hatred. You destroyed everything I built. Turned my own daughter against me. You did that yourself, Eleanor countered, the first time you raised your hand to me. The night you killed Mother. Something snapped in William's eyes. With unexpected speed, he lunged toward Eleanor, drawing a concealed dagger from his sleeve. Gint moved to intercept, but one of the mercenaries blocked his path. Eleanor stumbled backward, the pistol wavering in her grip as her father closed the distance between them, blade glinting in the lantern light. "You ungrateful child," William snarled. "Everything I did was for our legacy." Eleanor steadied the pistol, her father's face filling her vision. Not the monster of her nightmares, but simply a man, corrupt and hollow. Her finger tightened on the trigger. The report of the flintlock echoed through the library, momentarily drowning out even the storm's fury. Sunlight streamed through the high windows of Port Harlow's courthouse, illuminating motes of dust that danced in golden beams. The room was filled beyond capacity. Townspeople packed shoulder to shoulder to witness an event many had once thought impossible. William Blackwell, former harbormaster and self-styled ruler of Port Harlow, standing trial for his crimes. 2 weeks had passed since the night of the attack. The mercenary assault had been repelled, though not without cost. Several buildings along the waterfront lay in ruins, and fresh graves in the town cemetery testified to the price of resistance. Barrett had escaped with the remnants of his hired force, but the town's victory remained undeniable. William Blackwell had not escaped. The shot fired in the library that night had struck his shoulder rather than his heart. Eleanor's aim affected at the last moment, not by uncertainty, but by a conscious choice. She had denied him martyrdom, ensuring instead that he would face public justice for his actions. The magistrate's bench had been replaced by a more imposing seat, behind which sat Admiral Harrington, sent from the colonial capital to preside over proceedings deemed too significant for local adjudication. His weathered face remained impassive as evidence was presented. Ledgers, correspondence, sworn testimonies from merchants and officials implicated in Blackwell's schemes. A heavy wooden gavel rested before the Admiral, its polished head gleaming in the sunlight. This simple instrument of justice had become the focal point of the proceedings, each decisive strike marking another piece of evidence accepted, another testimony concluded, another step toward resolution. William sat at the defendant's table, his once commanding presence diminished by prison garb and shackled hands. His wounded shoulder remained bound, a constant reminder of his final confrontation with the daughter he had terrorized for years. "The court calls Eleanor Blackwell," announced the clerk. A hush fell over the crowded room as Eleanor approached the witness stand. She wore a simple blue dress, her hair arranged modestly, yet she carried herself with a quiet dignity that commanded attention. The fearful, hunched posture that had characterized her for so long was gone, replaced by the straight-backed bearing of a woman who had reclaimed her life. "Miss Blackwell," the Admiral addressed her, his tone respectful. "You have already provided written testimony regarding your father's actions over many years. Today, I ask you to speak specifically to the events surrounding your mother's death 8 years ago." Eleanor's gaze briefly met her father's across the courtroom. William's eyes burned with mingled rage and desperation, but she no longer flinched from his anger. "My mother, Catherine Blackwell, discovered my father's involvement in illegal trading activities," she began, her voice clear and steady. "She threatened to expose him to the proper authorities, believing it her moral duty despite the consequences to our family's standing." The room remained silent as Eleanor recounted that fateful night, the argument she had overheard, the sounds of struggle from her parents' bedroom, the unnatural silence that followed. How her father had emerged alone, later claiming her mother had succumbed suddenly to the fever that had weakened her in previous weeks. The physician who certified her death never examined her fully, Eleanor continued. "He was deeply indebted to my father and accepted his explanation without question. And you, a child of 8, were powerless to challenge this." The Admiral prompted gently. "Yes, sir." Eleanor's composure wavered only slightly. "When I tried to speak of what I'd heard, my father began disciplining me more harshly. Eventually, I learned that silence meant survival." William surged to his feet, chains rattling. "Lies. The girl has always been unstable." The gavel struck with decisive force. "You will remain silent, Mr. Blackwell, or be removed from these proceedings." As William subsided, seething, Eleanor continued her testimony, detailing years of abuse designed to ensure her silence and compliance. The courtroom listened in horrified silence, many townspeople shifting uncomfortably as they recognized their own complicity in ignoring signs they had chosen not to see. "Miss Blackwell," the Admiral said when she had finished, "your courage today honors your mother's memory and serves the cause of justice. You may step down." As Eleanor returned to her seat, her gaze swept the courtroom, noting familiar faces among the spectators. Captain Morris and his officers, townspeople who had finally found their voices against tyranny, and in the back, partially concealed in shadow, stood Gint Buccaneer. The pirate captain had remained in Port Harlow throughout the preparations for trial, despite the risk to himself. The tentative truce with Captain Morris had evolved into something approaching mutual respect, though neither man would have admitted as much openly. When court adjourned for the day, Eleanor made her way through the crowd to where Gint waited. "You did well," he told her simply. "It was strange," she admitted, speaking those words aloud after keeping them locked inside for so long. "Truth has weight," Gint observed. "Carrying it alone is a burden few can bear indefinitely." Outside the courthouse, they found Captain Morris deep in conversation with Admiral Harrington. The naval officers approached them with purpose. "Captain Buccaneer," the Admiral addressed him formally, "your actions during recent events have been noteworthy." "High praise indeed," Gint replied dryly. "The Crown takes a dim view of piracy," the Admiral continued unperturbed. "However, in light of evidence suggesting that several vessels you commandeered were engaged in illegal activities themselves, certain allowances might be considered," Morris elaborated. "The Admiralty is prepared to offer you a letter of marque, Captain. Legitimacy of a sort in exchange for your expertise against those who would abuse maritime law for personal gain. You're offering to make me a privateer?" Gint's surprise was evident. "After years of trying to hang me?" "Times change," the Admiral said simply. "Men of your particular talents and moral flexibility are sometimes necessary when conventional methods fail." Eleanor watched Gint's face as he considered the unexpected proposal. Legitimacy would mean safety for his crew, freedom from constant pursuit. Yet it would also mean constraints, accountability to powers he had long defied. "I'll consider it," he said finally. As the naval officers departed, Eleanor touched Gint's arm. "Will you accept?" His gaze returned to the courthouse, where the gavel of justice had finally fallen on William Blackwell's reign of terror. "Perhaps it would be a different kind of freedom. Freedom comes in many forms," Eleanor replied, newfound wisdom in her voice. "I'm only beginning to discover mine." Dusk painted Port Harlow in hues of amber and violet as the Redemption prepared for departure. The harbour, partially rebuilt after the mercenary attack, buzzed with the usual evening activities, fishermen returning with their catch, merchants securing their wares, taverns opening their doors to thirsty sailors. Life had begun to resume its rhythm, though the scars of recent events remained visible in charred timbers and fresh construction. William Blackwell's trial had concluded with a verdict surprising to none. The former harbormaster would spend the remainder of his life in the colonial prison at Fort James, far from the town he had ruled through fear and manipulation. Justice, long delayed, had finally been served, not just for Eleanor, but for Catherine Blackwell and countless others who had suffered under his corrupt reign. Aboard the Redemption, Eleanor stood at the railing, watching Port Harlow transform in the fading light. The town had been both prison and home, the backdrop to her greatest sorrows and most recent triumphs, leaving stirred, complicated emotions. Yet the pull of horizon and open water proved stronger than any lingering attachments to shore. "Having second thoughts?" Gint asked, joining her at the rail. Eleanor shook her head. "Not about leaving. Perhaps about who I become next." The question of identity had occupied her thoughts throughout the preparations for departure. She was no longer merely the harbour-master's daughter, defined by her father's position and cruelty. The inheritance she had received, Her mother's modest family fortune, restored to her by the court, meant she could chart any course she chose. The beauty of the sea, Gint observed, is that it allows for reinvention. Each port offers the chance to be someone new, someone of your own creation. From a chest nearby, Thorne retrieved a carefully folded bundle of fabric. "The crew thought you might want this before we sail," he said. Presenting it to Eleanor with uncharacteristic formality, she unfolded the cloth to reveal a ship's flag, but not the intimidating banner under which the Redemption typically sailed. This was new, crafted by the ship's sailmaker with evident care. It featured elements of the Redemption's original design, but incorporated subtle symbols of Eleanor's story. A broken chain, a rising sun, the silhouette of a bird in flight. "It's tradition," Gint explained, "when a new officer joins the crew under significant circumstances." "Officer?" Eleanor questioned. "Ship's chronicler and assistant physician," Gint clarified. "Mara speaks highly of your steady hands and quick learning, and every voyage deserves proper documentation." Eleanor ran her fingers over the flag's careful stitching, recognizing the gesture's significance. This wasn't merely acceptance, but acknowledgement of her unique place within their uncommon family. "We'll fly it for our departure," Thorne added, "as a farewell to your old life and welcome to the new." On the dock below, a small gathering had assembled to bid them farewell. Captain Morris stood with several of his officers, their presence representing the unusual arrangement Gint had negotiated with the Admiralty, not full legitimacy as a privateer, but a tacit understanding that allowed the Redemption to operate. Within certain boundaries, Eleanor had said her goodbyes to those few townspeople who had earned her. Respect Agnes from the tavern, who had finally spoken up against William, the young serving girl who had been first to confirm Eleanor's accusations, Father Michaels, who had begged forgiveness for his earlier inaction. These connections, though not strong enough to keep her in Port Harlow, represented the first honest relationships she had formed in years. "Tide's turning," Fletcher called from midship. "We'll need to catch the evening wind to clear the headland." Gint nodded his acknowledgement before turning back to Eleanor. "Last chance to remain ashore. The sea isn't always kind, even to those who love her." Eleanor's gaze drifted to the harbormaster's house on the hill, now empty and awaiting new occupants. She had ordered every trace of her father removed, the furnishings donated to those whose homes had been damaged in the attack. The building stood as a shell, much like the life she was leaving behind. "My mother once told me that the bravest choice is the one that terrifies you but feels right nonetheless," she replied. "The sea terrifies me. I've watched it my whole life from that window," she nodded toward the house, "but never felt its motion beneath me. Yet something about this ship, this crew. It feels like the path I'm meant to follow." Gint studied her for a moment, recognizing the resolution in her expression. Then, "Welcome aboard, officially." As the Redemption's crew cast off lines and set sails, Eleanor stood tall beside the helmsman. The new flag caught the evening breeze, unfurling above them like a declaration. Below, Captain Morris offered a formal salute, not to the pirate he had once hunted, but to the unlikely alliance they had formed in the face of greater corruption. Port Harlow receded slowly, the harbour opening to the vast Atlantic beyond. The same waters that had once represented an impossible boundary to Eleanor now stretched before her with infinite possibility. The setting sun gilded the waves, and for the first time in memory, she faced the coming night without fear. Storm clouds gathered on the distant horizon, much as they had on the night Gint Buccaneer had first entered her life. But unlike that terrible evening, these approaching clouds held no terror for Eleanor. She had weathered the worst storm already, the long, dark tempest of her childhood, and emerged into unexpected light. "Where do we sail first?" she asked, the wind catching her words. Gint smiled, pointing to the open sea. "First we sail free. The destination comes after." The redemption carved its path through darkening waters, bearing Eleanor toward a future she had only dared imagine in her most secret dreams. Not just escape, but purpose. Not merely survival, but life fully embraced at last.